This is White Plains Week, the weekly roundup of White Plains, Westchester, and world news. With John Bailey, editor and publisher of the daily internet newspaper White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, WPCNR.com. Jim Benerofe, editor and publisher of SuburbanStreet.com and WhitePlains.com. And me, Peter Katz, formerly with NBC, ABC News, and stations from Boston to Los Angeles. White Plains Week, what's happening? Who are the newsmakers? What's in store for the future? The views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants. White Plains Week is presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76, Verizon Fios Channel 45, and on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. Now, White Plains Week.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. White Plains, Westchester, and the world. John Bailey with Jim Benerofe, the scribe that is ahead of the School of Journalism in the city of White Plains for eons, and of course the anchor for all seasons, the ubiquitous Peter Katz. All right, and how about those ubiquitous headlines?
And here are the headlines for the week of January 25th, 2019. White Plains Housing Authority building at 86 DeKalb Avenue has been without heat for 3 weeks. Boiler trouble the reason. Governor Cuomo hammers agreement to build 4 new Metro North stations in the Bronx to open up commuting from Bronx to Penn Station without the subway. Fare hike mulled, then pulled to consider alternatives. Governor also signs the codification of the right to abortion in New York State. The developer of 52 North Broadway will ask the Common Council to close hearings on the 400 apartment complex on former Good Counsel property February 4th. Con Edison says no more new gas connections in Westchester County effective in March. County Executive Latimer has concerns it will hurt development. New Mario Cuomo Bridge leaves motorists at risk in high winds. The government remains closed the 4th straight week. They haven't done anything to us. Harrison Police Chief pleads guilty to tax evasion.
Thank you, Jim. And we go to the White Plains Week video newsreel without video today. And we're looking at 86 DeKalb Avenue, which got a big splash on News 12 this week because many residents had complained to apparently News 12 about a lack of heat. And the reporter for News 12 found out from the manager of the building that it was a boiler problem. But when I contacted the City of White Plains Mayor's office and contacted White Plains Housing Authority for an explanation of, what's really causing this, how come it's taking so long, they haven't gotten back to me. And so we await some sort of explanation for how a building can be without heat for 3 weeks at the coldest week we ever experienced.
It happens
yeah.
Especially in New York City, where the New York City Housing Authority has been called on the carpet numerous times for not maintaining the heating facilities properly.
Yeah.
The question is just how cold were the residents in their apartments? Were they able to bring in electric heaters?
Well, they've gone out and gotten some, yes.
And just what was the level of discomfort?
They were saying it was 25 degrees, some of the interviewees.
It seems unusual that if you're in a situation like that, you would go to a news outlet rather than to the Housing Authority, but it seems as if the Housing Authority was aware of it, at least from that News 12 report. The question is, why couldn't something have been done sooner? You don't
that is the question.
If you have a real problem like that, you don't necessarily have to wait for a boiler repair or replacement. There are portable heating units that can be driven up to a building and can be used to feed a heat source into the existing heating system.
Well, I don't know how people could survive in some of the temperatures we had.
Well, that's what they were complaining about.
And it just is beyond me that something wasn't done.
Well, you've had experience with buildings like that. Have you ever had a situation where you had a heating failure? Or what would you do?
I'm sure that over the years there must have been some heating failure at some point. I don't remember anything specifically. And I managed a lot of the buildings, residential buildings, but I know there was a heating problem in one particular building. Which
how did you handle it?
I don't remember exactly.
Well, what would you do if it was?
Well,
in this
case, this was. So this wasn't the boiler. This was a maintenance problem. That.
But could you bring in machines that could pump in heat on an interim basis? Is that feasible?
Actually, I think the building had heat, but there were some, for lack of a better way of describing it, there was a structural problem.
You know, there's always an answer. There really is no reason for people to suffer for an extended period without heat. If you can't bring in sufficient electric heaters or bring in an outside unit to feed the building, then you send the people to someplace that's warm temporarily.
Right. Now, we talked to the county about exactly that, and the county said that they have not been contacted at the Department of Social Services by anyone from the building saying, I just can't stand it here, can you get me some shelter? And the county is quite willing to help them. So,
well, the obvious thing is that they could always bring in trailers.
Something.
Right, something like that. Something should have been done, or at least they should be telling us what they are doing. They're a public organization that's responsible for these people. You know what I'm saying?
It's a housing authority.
Yeah.
And they have authority to house people. So.
Yes. How they house them is another matter. Yeah. But now, the big story of the week was the Governor Cuomo's hammering out for a project, a tremendously expensive project, to put in 4 new train stations along the Connecticut branch of the
the New Haven line.
New Haven line, that's it.
Now, what this does really is start to address an issue which has been on the table for a couple of decades, which is giving access to Metro-North riders to Penn Station on the west side of Manhattan. In Cuomo's remarks and in a statement put out by County Executive Latimer, reference is made to Metro-North riders eventually being able to access Penn Station. So your only destination does no longer have to be Grand Central Station on the east side. Now you can get to the west side and you can avoid the hassle of trying to get from Grand Central Station over to the Penn Station area.
The shuttle, and which only goes over to 42nd Street.
Times Square, and then at 42nd Street you have to change to get down to Penn Station. The one thing that no one was talking about was the routing of this, because it will take you through Queens, over the Hellgate Bridge, through Queens, and then into the tunnel that goes under the East River into Penn Station, now used mainly by Long Island Railroad, also used by the long-distance Amtrak lines. So in terms of practicality, where they're saying that Metro-North riders will save a lot of time and the hassle, well, you'll save the hassle of not having to deal with the subway to get to Penn Station. But I don't know how much time you're going to save, because it's a pretty long trip through the Bronx and into Queens.
Let's see the map again.
And then ultimately into Penn Station.
Yeah, look at that big hook into Queens.
Yeah. Interesting idea. Question is just how many people in the Bronx are going to opt for Metro North over the subway and buses, which are part of the New York City transit system.
And
a
also
very
the
inexpensive way of doing it. Right.
And the expense of doing that. But I think it also allows people in Connecticut to come in and take jobs down in the Bronx.
Well,
conveniently.
That's true. It does work two ways. If you want to
employment program for
if you want to get into the Bronx, you could do that by using Metro North. Yeah. One thing of greater significance, I believe, at least in the short term for people, is that the board, when they met, decided not to go ahead and vote to increase Metro North fares.
Yes, that was right after the Bronx borough chief, Ruben Diaz, complained bitterly about the fares going up. And
so
next day they withdraw.
They've put the issue off for at least a month to see if there's some way of meeting the financial needs of Metro North without raising fares, at least right now.
Alternatives. Let's take a look at the stations they're going to build. Nope. Next slide. There we are. And they're going to do one at Co-op City, and then over at
Hunts Point, Parkchester in the Bronx. Yeah. It's a major housing development which was put up in the 40s originally by Metropolitan Life.
Yeah. Very good knowledge there. Yeah. And Hunts Point, which is a very important new hub. My daughter works down in that area, and it is really humming. So that is important. And the one thing that is left out here is Rockland County. Rockland County still has no direct route.
Well, you do if you stay on the west side of the Hudson River.
Yes.
The part of what, if you remember, was originally proposed for the new bridge was a rail connection between the opposite sides of the Hudson River. Yeah, which we don't have.
But they were going to spend $16 billion on that, but then they say, no, we just want to build one for $5 billion.
And the other rail thing you never hear about is whatever happened to the proposal for high-speed rail between New York City and Stewart Airport.
Well, considering that they're also going to expand Stewart.
Well, as we reported last week, there's at least one developer who thinks that Stewart Airport has a real future and has bought like 89 acres of land up there for development.
Well, you've got Poughkeepsie is developing a huge medical complex.
Yes,
also.
Yeah, that's Marist and HealthQuest are developing a new medical school, basically.
Right.
Yeah. Now, more locally, there was a meeting this week in which the North Broadway Civic Association discussed the city's report on the contamination on the site.
On Good Counsel.
Right, and this is the plan. And the area of contamination is in the lower right, where the apartments are supposedly going to be built. And when this report was circulated, I put it up on my website.
WPCNR.com.
Yes, right. I immediately, within a couple of hours, got a response from the public relations agency for the builder, Thompson and Bender, and they sent me the next letter, which was William Null's letter. Mr. Null is an attorney representing the developer, 52 North Broadway, which said that at the bottom down there, accordingly, we respectfully submit that the public hearing held in connection should be closed on February 4th and a reasonable period for public comment be established to complete the DEIS process so that the final environmental impact statement may be prepared. And I checked with Mr. Thompson of Thompson and Bender and asked whether this meant they were asking the council to just approve it. And move on.
Yeah, well, they really can't approve it until they do the environmental findings.
Yes.
And they can't do the environmental findings until everyone has kind of settled in on what they're going to do to remediate any issues that have been found over there.
Right. And next slide, please.
But there certainly is
That is the AKRF, the developer's response that say our findings are right in line with what the city's private consultant said. And then we got this piece. Mr. Thompson answered some questions for me, and he had indicated that they were going to ask the council that to approve their previously proposed mitigation plan. And then, moving on, the next slide, Thompson writes, the applicant hopes to engage a meaningful conversation with the city and their consultants, as well as the NISDEC, to develop the final remediation method for this site during redevelopment based on the data collected on this site. There were no conditions discovered that would indicate that the NISDEC approved and previously implemented remediation measures are insufficient. So they're really pushing the council to move ahead, approve it, and move on.
Okay.
So that's it. That's where it stands, folks. But
so you'll find out whether they're going to close the hearing as requested at the February regularly stated meeting.
We shall see. Now, what's intriguing here is that there was another big bombshell put out last week. Con Edison said it was no longer going to make new gas connections in development around the county.
Right. Now, there's some feeling that perhaps what Con Edison is doing here is trying to add to the pressure to allow new gas pipelines to come into the area. While the actual intensity of any shortage, the impact of any gas shortage has yet to be demonstrated, there is some feeling that what we're seeing here may be an attempt to raise public awareness
or perhaps raise rates.
The issue. There's great concern that if indeed Con Edison does refuse additional gas hookups, this could impact development substantially.
Yeah, let's look at the county areas affected.
In Westchester. County Executive Latimer is planning to meet with Con Edison to try to get a handle on just what their issues are and just why they can no longer accept new hookups to the gas lines effective March.
Yeah. In fact, they put out a statement from County Executive Latimer, and here it is. Next slide, please. The county executive writes, however, before we draw conclusions, we must learn more about the situation. We have requested a meeting with Con Edison officials and hope to bring to the table local, state, and federal officials to discuss this matter. We need to understand what led to this moratorium, how the calculation for gas is made, how many customers exist in each municipality, which slated projects are in jeopardy, North 60 comes to mind, and which are not, the duration of the moratorium, how that calculation was determined, and we have many questions. Now, I asked the Department of Communications whether these meetings will be open to the press, and they said they would not be.
Okay,
Well, I don't think that's right. I think Con Edison should lay it out in public. If the press isn't there, we don't know what they're telling.
You could talk to the Public Service Commission.
Yes. Speaking of the Public Service Commission, how are we doing on dealing with the Con Ed and the, what was that other power company? Who that bungled this spring? But anyway, how is Public Service Commission doing on deciding whether to fine Con Ed and put on some...
Talking about NYSEG? Is that what you mean?
Not NYSEG. Yeah, New York State
Gas and Electric.
Yes, right. I was confusing that. And I really wonder, how long does it take to figure all this out? It's been 10 months since all that hullabaloo over their lousy performance, and it was a lousy performance.
You're talking about storm reaction.
And the Public Service Commission is responsible for figuring out how to punish these firms for their ineptitude last spring.
Well, I don't know if you can say punish. I think it's
they need to be punished.
Better performance, John.
Yes, I just say it like it is, ladies and gentlemen, because they get let off time after time. It's 10 months, and nobody's said a peep since June about this. Not a peep. Remember all that hullabaloo last spring?
I don't know. Just count your blessings, because so far we have dodged the storm bullet this winter.
You had to say that. You had to say that. But this talking over about things is really something that is nice, because the government isn't talking about anything.
Well, if you're talking about the Washington government,
that's right.
Well, we're talking. There's a lot of talk in Washington.
Yes.
And it's talk about the government, and it's talk about the personalities
but
involved.
Not talking about the action that needs to be taken.
You know, some of the latest things going on. You have the Air Traffic Controllers Union and the Airline Pilots Association joining together with the Flight Attendants Union to point out that the air traffic system is in jeopardy because of this government shutdown, where you have the air traffic controllers essentially working 60 hours a week, and then some of them having to take paying jobs on the side, like driving Uber cars and things of that nature, just to be able to put food on the table and hopefully meet the rent.
It's tedious work.
Due. And you know, if I were flying, I would not want an exhausted air traffic controller responsible for keeping me.
Yeah, it looks okay down there. Come on in. Yes.
And you have TSA workers still calling in sick. The latest figure was that something like 10% have been calling in sick because they're being told you have to report for work, but we're not going to pay you. Now, some have characterized this as being volunteerism, and they're doing this because they feel very strongly about the good of the country and the needs of the country,
well,
which they may very well, but still it's not volunteer when you're told by your employer, you have to show up and we're not going to pay you, and if you don't show up, we're going to fire you.
Yeah.
That's not volunteerism to me.
No, that's slavery.
Something like that. And then you have Wilbur Ross, our Commerce Secretary, who happens to be a billionaire, who basically said, well, let them eat cake. He said, well, if people aren't being paid, that shouldn't stop them from coming into work, and if they are having trouble paying the rent, they can take out a loan.
Yes.
Well,
they probably already have loans.
What he doesn't say also is that the bank rates for personal loans these days are around 9%, which will put a dent in anyone's budget, especially if you're living paycheck to paycheck. In the meantime, we did see a square-off between President Trump and Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, and guess who won?
Yes,
Nancy won. You'll notice that Nancy Pelosi is one person who Trump does not have a nickname for. He refers to her as as
column
Nancy.
on that.
Can you imagine that?
Yes. Well,
so Trump finally agreed that he will not be making the State of the Union address this Tuesday in the House chamber, and Pelosi says, well, you're welcome to do that as soon when we get the government reopened, then we'll be happy to talk to you about scheduling a new date for your State of the Union message. But what do? I mean, if you're going to do a State of the Union message, you stand up and say, ladies and gentlemen, the State of the Union is crummy because the government is closed, because I said I want to close the government unless I get my wall.
Yeah. Well, that's what he was faced with saying.
You can't open a State of the Union
want to say
message.
that. The wall is such a waste of money, it's unbelievable.
Well, I'm glad to see there's another 5.7 billion for something, right?
I don't
Just, but what intrigues me most is they arrested what is his name? But anyway, they arrested a gentleman for allegedly tampering with witnesses involved in the Mueller probe.
Yeah.
I'm having a...
Yeah, I can't remember his name either, but I know who he is because he wrote a book also.
But be that as it may, it's a new turn in the case, because if you're going to go after people for witness tampering, that means there must be some really big-time tampering.
Well, there are allegations that both Trump and Rudy Giuliani have been engaging in witness tampering in plain sight in public. Trump with tweets designed as attacks against Michael Cohen and Michael Cohen's father-in-law and Michael Cohen's wife, and Giuliani was doing the same thing on Fox News.
Well, it's very irresponsible. Very irresponsible, and it really is. We're in a box canyon on this situation, and somebody has to ride out of it.
Well, Trump is very irresponsible.
That's for sure.
Period, and nobody wants to recognize that.
Yeah. Now, back in early January, the BAMA, the Building Owners and Managers Association of Westchester, was very bullish on the prospects for development in Westchester County. We think more supply coming to White Plains is going to benefit awareness for White Plains, said the Lennar executive who's building the 434 apartments on Mamaroneck Avenue East, Post Road, and Mitchell Place. What we see in Westchester County is there is a change going on with the transformation of many former office buildings which were not really cutting it into other uses. We are trying to take advantage of that with some of the things we are doing, said Duncan of George Comfort and Company. Now, what do you think, Jim? Is this false optimism, or is this reason for hope?
I don't know. Listen, I think that particular building that you just mentioned is going to be very interesting because it's going to have some large apartment units in it, and I think that is something that is needed. And that's, I think, a particularly good location for apartments. But I do think they're building an awful lot of apartments, and whether the city can absorb all this remains to be seen.
And whether the sewers can take it. You know, good question there.
Well, that's a more important issue, I suppose.
Well, anyway, that's all for White Plains Week this week, thankfully. And John Bailey, Peter Katz, Jim Benerofe, good night for White Plains Week.
This has been White Plains Week, news and commentary about White Plains, Westchester, and the world. The views and opinions expressed on this program were solely those of the participants. White Plains Week, produced by White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, and presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76 and Verizon Fios Channel 45. You may view White Plains Week anytime on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. For White Plains Week, this is Peter Katz speaking.